Three women are sitting and talking about the best soda pop-based nicknames for their boyfriends. One girl says, "My boyfriend is like 7 Up because he can keep it up all week." The next girl says, "Oh yeah? My boyfriend is like Mountain Dew because he can do me on top of my mountains any day." The last woman says, "You can call my boyfriend Jack Daniels." Another girl protests, "You have to compare him to a pop. That's a hard liquor." The last girl replies with a wink, "Exactly." A lawyer, an economist, and a teacher were going to the bathroom. The lawyer gets done, washes his hands, and then proceeds to use almost the entire roll of paper towels to dry his hands. He says, "I was taught to be thorough." The economist gets done, washes his hands, but uses only one paper towel. He says, "I was taught to be environmentally friendly." The teacher gets done and leaves without washing his hands. He says, "I was taught not to piss on my hands." A company brought in a new CEO, Richard, hoping he'd turn things around and make operations run smoother. On his first day, Richard decided to weed out any slackers. While walking around the office, he spotted a young guy leaning against a wall, not doing much of anything. Richard saw his chance to make a statement. He marched up to the guy and asked, "How much do you make in a week?" The guy replied, $200. "Why?" With everyone watching, Richard pulled out his wallet, handed the guy $200, and said, "Here's a week's pay. Now get out and don't come back. We don't need lazy people like you here." Feeling proud of himself, Richard turned to the rest of the team and asked, "So what exactly did that guy do here?" A senior employee hesitated for a moment before saying, that was the pizza delivery guy." George went for his annual checkup every year. He prided himself on staying fit and healthy by going on walks in the neighborhood, though age had taken its toll on his eyesight. After his checkup, George sat and chattered with his doctor, proudly telling Dr. Stevens about his latest discovery. "Doc, I'm blessed," he said. "God knows my eyesight is going, so he puts on the light when I pee and turns it off when I'm done." The doctor chuckled, but a nagging curiosity led him to call George's wife later that day. "Maria," he said, "your husband's test results are just fine, but he said something strange. He claims that God turns the lights on and off for him when he uses the bathroom at night." George's wife laughed out loud. "That old fool, he's been peeing in the refrigerator again. I thought it was the dog." Mrs. Smith asks her class, "What part of the body grows 10 times larger when stimulated?" The class is silent, so the teacher asks them again. This time, a little girl named Emily raises her hand. "Mrs. Smith, you shouldn't be asking 7th graders this kind of question. I'm going to tell my parents." Mrs. Smith ignores her and calls on Jimmy. He answers, "The pupil in your eye." Mrs. Smith replies, "Very good, Jimmy." Then she turns to Emily. "Now for you, young lady, I have 3 things to tell you. First, you have a very dirty mind. Second, you didn't do your homework. Third, you are going to be very disappointed." My wife and I were in the middle of a heated argument when I blurted out, "Pack your things and—" Just as I was about to finish, her phone rang. I paused, allowing her to take the call. It was her father. She put the phone on speaker, and I could hear every word. After the usual father-daughter pleasantries, he said, "My daughter, I just transferred $6 million into your account. Give your husband $4 million, and you can keep the rest." He continued, "Also, I'm sending a brand new Land Cruiser Jeep for you and your husband to use as a family car." Once the call ended, and after a cheerful goodbye, she turned to me with a triumphant look and asked, "You said I should pack my things and—" "What?" Without missing a beat, I smiled and said, "I said pack your things. And give them to me to wash. I'll even iron them once the power comes back." Michael sat quietly, reflecting on how truly blessed he was to have such a wonderful wife. Her kindness, beauty, and the way she made every meal feel like a celebration of love. He couldn't help but feel deeply grateful. Curious, he asked his mother-in-law, "Why did you make her so kind-hearted?" Mother-in-law replied, "So you could love her, my son." Michael smiled and asked the next question, "And why did you make her so good-looking?" Mother-in-law responded, "So you could love her, my son." Feeling inspired, Michael asked again, "Why did you make her such a good cook?" The answer came with warmth, "So you could love her, my son." Michael paused, reflecting deeply on the answers. But then, in the back of his mind, a thought bubbled up. He hesitated for a moment before asking, "I don't mean to seem ungrateful, but why did you make her so, well, not so bright?" There was a brief silence before. With a chuckle, she answered, "So she could love you, my son." Charlie, a new retiree greeter at Walmart, just couldn't seem to get to work on time. Every day he was 5, 10, 15 minutes late. But he was a good worker, really tidy, clean-shaven, sharp-minded, and a real credit to the company, and obviously demonstrating their older, person-friendly policies. One day, the boss called him into the office for a talk. "Charlie, I have to tell you, I like your work ethic. You do a bang-up job when you finally get here, but your being late so often is quite bothersome." "Yes, I know, boss, and I am working on it." "Well, good. You're a team player. That's what I like to hear." "Yes, sir, I understand your concern, and I will try harder." Seeming puzzled, the manager went on to comment, "I know you're retired from the armed forces. What did they say to you there if you showed up in the morning late so often?" The old man looked down at the floor, then smiled. He chuckled quietly, then said with a grin, "They usually saluted and said, 'Good morning, Admiral. Can I get your coffee, sir?'" A man woke up early and kissed his wife good morning and goodbye. He made a thermos of coffee and a thermos of hot soup as his car warmed up in the driveway. He packed his fishing gear and proceeded to drive out to the lake for some ice fishing. As he drove down the road, he realized that his visibility was horrible. It was too dangerous, so he turned around and went back home. Quietly, he re-entered his house. He crept up the stairs and stripped down to his long johns. He slipped into bed and nestled beside his sleeping wife. Sleepily, she said, "I didn't expect you so soon." He whispered in her ear, "It's a friggin' blizzard out there. It's a mess." His wife whispered back, "Yeah. Can you believe my idiot husband is out there fishing right now?" A young doctor had moved out to a small community to replace a doctor who was retiring. The older doctor suggested that the young one accompany him on his rounds, so the community could become used to a new doctor. At the first house, a woman complains, "I've been a little sick to my stomach." The older doctor says, "Well, you've probably been overdoing the fresh fruit. Cut back on the amount you've been eating and see if that does the trick." As they left, the younger man said, "You didn't even examine that woman? How'd you come to the diagnosis so quickly?" "I didn't have to. You noticed I dropped my telescope on the floor in there? When I bent over to pick it up, I noticed a half-dozen banana peels in the trash. That was what probably was making her sick." The younger doctor said, "Pretty clever. If you don't mind, I think I'll try that at the next house." Arriving at the next house, they spent several minutes talking with a younger woman. She said that she just didn't have the energy she once did and said, "I'm feeling terribly run down lately." "You've probably been doing too much for the church." The younger doctor told her, "Perhaps you should cut back a bit and see if that helps." As they left, the elder doctor said, "I know that woman well. Your diagnosis is almost certainly correct. She's very active in the church. But how did you arrive at it?" "I did what you did at the last house. I dropped my stethoscope, and when I bent down to retrieve it, I noticed the priest under the bed." The weather was very hot, and a man wanted desperately to take a dive in a nearby lake. He didn't bring his swimming trunks, but who cared? He was all alone, so he undressed and got into the water. After some delightful minutes of cool swimming, he got out of the water and noticed two old ladies walking along the shore in his direction. He panicked and grabbed a bucket lying in the sand nearby. He held the bucket in front of his private parts and sighed with relief. The ladies got closer and looked at him. He felt awkward and wanted to move. Then one of the ladies said, "You know, I have a special gift. I can read minds." "Impossible," said the embarrassed man. "You really know what I think?" "Yes," the lady replied. "Right now, I bet you think that the bucket you're holding has a bottom." A guy shopping in a supermarket noticed a little old lady following him around. If he stopped, she stopped. Furthermore, she kept staring at him. She finally overtook him at the checkout, turned to him and said, "I hope I haven't made you feel ill at ease. It's just that you look so much like my late son." He answered, "That's okay. I know it's silly, but if you call out, 'Goodbye, Mom,' as I leave the store, it would make me feel so happy." She then went through the checkout, and as she was on her way out of the store, the man called out, "Goodbye, Mother." The little old lady waved and smiled back at him and said, "Thank you." Pleased that he had brought a little sunshine into someone's day, he went to pay for his groceries. "That comes to $121.85, said the clerk. "It can't be that much. I only bought 5 items. The clerk replied, "Yes, but your mother said you'd pay for her things too." A little boy and a little girl attended the same school and became good friends. Every day at lunch, they would sit together and discovered that they both brought chicken sandwiches every single day. This went on throughout the 4th and 5th grades, until one day the boy noticed that the girl wasn't eating a chicken sandwich. He asked, "Hey, how come you're not eating chicken? Don't you like it anymore?" She replied, "I love it, but I have to stop eating it." "Why?" he asked, curious. She pointed to her lap and whispered, "Because I'm starting to grow little feathers down there." Surprised, he said, "Let me see." "Okay," she agreed and showed him. He looked and said, "You're right. You better not eat any more chicken." The boy continued to eat his chicken sandwiches, but one day he showed up with a peanut butter sandwich instead. The girl noticed and asked why he had switched. He leaned in and said, "I have to stop eating chicken sandwiches. I'm starting to get feathers down there too." Intrigued, she asked if she could look. So he showed her. She gasped and exclaimed, "Oh my God, it's too late for you. You've already got the neck and gizzards." The butcher asks, "What do you want?" The dog points to steak in a glass case. "How many pounds?" The dog barks twice. "Anything else?" The dog points to some pork chops and barks 4 times. So the butcher wraps up a 2-pound steak and 4 pork chops and places the bag in the dog's mouth. He then takes money from a purse tied around the dog's neck and sees him out. A customer, who has been watching in amazement, follows the dog to a house several blocks away, where it rings the doorbell to be let in. As the owner appears at the door, the customer says, "What a remarkable dog." "Remarkable," snorts the owner. "This is the 2nd time this week he's forgotten his keys." A blonde was driving home after a game and got caught in a really bad hailstorm. Her car was covered with dents, so the next day she took it to a repair shop. The shop owner saw that she was a blonde, so he decided to have some fun. He told her to go home and blow into the tailpipe really hard and all the dents would pop out. So the blonde went home, got down on her hands and knees and started blowing into her tailpipe. Nothing happened, so she blew a little harder and still nothing happened. Her blonde roommate saw her and asked, "What are you doing?" The first blonde told her how the repairman had instructed her to blow into the tailpipe in order to get all the dents to pop out. The roommate rolled her eyes and said, Like hello? You need to roll up the windows first." It's the end of the school year, the teacher has written her reports, and there's really nothing to do. All the kids are restless because it's Friday afternoon and not much is happening. The teacher says, "Whoever answers the questions I ask first and correctly can leave early today." Little Johnny says to himself, "Good, I want to get out of here. I'm clever. That answer's mine." The teacher asked, "Who said 7 years ago?" Before Johnny could open his mouth, Susie said, "Abraham Lincoln." The teacher said, "That's right, Susie. You can go." Johnny was mad. The teacher asked, "Who said I have a dream?" Before Johnny could open his mouth, Mary said, "Martin Luther King." The teacher said, "That's right, Mary. You can go." Johnny was even madder than before. The teacher asked, "Who said, 'Ask not what your country can do for you?'" Before Johnny could open his mouth, Nancy said, "John Kennedy." The teacher said, "That's right, Nancy. You can go." Johnny was fuming. Suddenly, Johnny shouted from the back of the class, "I wish these bitches would keep their mouths shut." The teacher asked, "Who said that?" Johnny answered, "Bill Clinton. See you next year." Little Johnny went up to his father and asked, "What is the difference between potentially and realistically?" The father pondered for a while, then answered, "Go ask your mother if she would sleep with Robert Redford for £1,000,000. Also, ask your sister if she would sleep with Brad Pitt for £1,000,000. Come back and tell me what you've learned." Little Johnny went to his mother and asked, "Would you sleep with Robert Redford for £1,000,000? The mother replied, "Of course I would. I wouldn't pass up an opportunity like that." Johnny then went to his sister and said, "Would you sleep with Brad Pitt for £1,000,000? The girl replied, "Oh gosh, I would just love to do that. I would be nuts to pass up that opportunity." Little Johnny then thought about it for 2 or 3 days and went back to his dad. His father asked him, "Did you find out the difference between potential and realistic?" Johnny replied, "Yes, potentially we're sitting on £2,000,000, but realistically we're living with 2 slappers." The father replied, "That's my boy. He's 85 and insists on taking his wife's hand everywhere they go." When he was asked why his wife kept looking away, he responded, "Because she has Alzheimer's." Then he was asked, "Will your wife worry if you let her go?" He then replied, "She doesn't remember anything. She doesn't know who I am anymore. She hasn't recognized me for years." Surprised, I said, "And you have continued to guide her every single day, even though she doesn't recognize you?" The old man smiled and looked into my eyes and said, "She may not know who I am, but I know who she is, and she is the love of my life." A man goes into a shop in Chinatown and sees a gold sculpture of a rat. He can't stop staring at it. It's like something is calling out to him. He asks the old man behind the counter, "How much for the statue?" The old man strokes his beard and replies, $10 for the statue, $100 for the story." "Story? Forget that, I'll just take the statue," the man says. He pays the $10 and leaves. As he's walking back home, he starts to get a weird feeling, like someone is watching him. He turns around and spots a rat following him. He shrugs it off and keeps walking. But when he turns around again, there are 2 rats. Then 3. Then 5. Then 10. All following him. The man starts walking faster as more and more rats start to follow him. He breaks out into a run as rats start streaming towards him out of alleyways and buildings. Finally, he turns towards the docks. He runs right to the edge of the water and throws the golden rat statue as far as he can into the deep water. The stream of rats breaks around him, and they all jump into the water after the statue, drowning in the murky depths. Once the last rat has sunk below the surface, the man races back to the shop where he bought the statue. He bursts in, and the old man looks at him smugly. "Ah, I see you have returned for the story." "No, I want to know if you have a statue of a lawyer." A young husband comes home one night and his wife throws her arms around his neck. "Darling, I have great news. I'm a month overdue. I think we're going to have a baby." The doctor gave me a test today, but until we find out for sure, we can't tell anybody. The next day, a guy from the electric company rings the doorbell because the young couple hasn't paid their last bill. "Are you Mrs. Smith? You're a month overdue, you know." "How do you know?" stammers the young woman. "Well, ma'am, it's in our files," says the man from the electric company. "What are you saying? It's in your files?" "Absolutely." "Well, let me talk to my husband about this tonight." That night, she tells her husband about the visit, and he, mad as a bull, rushes to the electric company offices the first thing the next morning. "What's going on here? You have it on file that my wife is a month overdue?" "What business is that of yours?" the husband shouts. "Just calm down," says the clerk. "It's nothing serious. All you have to do is pay us." "Pay you? And if I refuse?" "Well, in that case, sir, we'd have no option but to cut yours off." "And what would my wife do then?" the husband asks. "I don't know. I guess she'd have to use a candle,"